Very, very big welcome to everybody tonight, and it's an absolutely stellar lineup. Whoa. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to leave that up to our convener, Jeremy Smith. And I've got two jobs to perform today. Firstly, to thank the traditional owners of the land where we're sitting today, the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thank you for the opportunity to share this land, which has been yours for at least 60 millennia. My second task is to introduce you to Jeremy, the man who's going to ask all the questions and keep the conversation flowing. Jeremy has a very grand title. It is Practice Director, Community Emerging and Experimental Arts, right here at the Australia Council for the Arts. Now, never wanting to be underprepared, I dropped into my search engine Jeremy Smith, Australia and Arts, and in 0.75 seconds I had 12,300,000 hits. Now, I didn't have time to see if they're all about our Jeremy, so I took a shortcut and checked out his LinkedIn profile, where I could see that he is a most accomplished individual. He graduated from the WA Academy of Performing Arts in 1997. He climbed through the ranks in the Department of Culture and the Arts in the West Australian Government. He moved from there to the fabulous WA arts company Dada, where he stayed for more than 4 years. He then jumped into the private sector and I suppose looking for the big bucks, where he was Senior Advisor in the Community Investment Division of Rio Tinto, spending the big bucks. And in late 2014, he was promoted to Community Investment Manager with Rio, and wouldn't that just be the most fantastic job, handing out the money on behalf of Rio? But it got even better come early last year when he joined the Australia Council in his current role. Oh, and by the way, he had toiled for 4 long years as Deputy Chair of the Australia Council's Community Partnerships Committee, which he completed mid-2013. Jeremy also knows all about festivals, he knows about youth arts, he knows how to open up creative opportunities for people right the way across Australia. So really, it's hard to imagine anyone better to lead our discussion. Jeremy Smith, thank you.
Goodness me. Can everyone hear me? Am I on? Am I? Yes? Check. Yeah, there we go. Hi. Thank you, SAMAG, very much for allowing me to join you here tonight and to convene tonight's discussion. First of all, I too would obviously like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and their elders, past, present and future. We're gathered tonight on what always has been and always will be their land. It's also a bit of a momentous week here in Australia. It's on the eve of the inaugural Yirramboi First Nations Festival down in Melbourne, which kicks off on Friday night and runs for 10 days down in Melbourne. Jacob Boehm and his team have put together an incredible program. And I guess personally, I'd like to acknowledge how much my engagements with Australia's First People have shaped my own values and perspectives towards a lot of the themes that we'll be discussing tonight. And you guys chime in here as well, obviously. I've been fortunate enough to sit and learn from Indigenous artists, elders, children, and groups and communities right across Australia, but especially back home in WA. And I personally consider it a very solid foundation from an intrinsic foundation, which I continue to learn and grow my own practice and ideals from. So it's been great to have been a part of several gatherings in the last 12 months, which have really placed issues around sovereignty, reconciliation, colonisation at front and centre of not just the art sector, but more broadly within community. And we've got a long way to go. It's the beginning of a conversation, and long may that conversation continue. And whilst many of us on the panel tonight have obviously worked with communities of First Nation people and practitioners and can talk to that experience, we hope any Indigenous people here tonight may offer their voice and perspective on tonight's discussion and conversations too. My great pleasure now, I feel a bit like a thorn between 3 beautiful roses, is to introduce, what was that horrible television show, Beauty and the Beast? To introduce our 3 panel members tonight. So without further ado, I'll begin with Kim McConville, who is the Executive Director of Beyond Empathy. Kim has been working with Aboriginal communities for 27 years and has used arts, culture and community development practices to influence change, increase health, wellbeing, education and learning outcomes for young people and their families experiencing recurring hardship. Kim worked for 7 years with the award-winning organisation Big Heart before establishing BE in 2004 with long-time colleague and creative partner Philip Crawford. Kim has extensive expertise in facilitating collaborative practices across divided and multiply disadvantaged communities, enabling divided groups and individuals to find new ways to work together. Her work is renowned for the long haul, staying with communities for 10 years or longer. Kim has been awarded for her collaborative practices and forging new partnerships across government, corporate, philanthropic and community sectors. Kim is a member of the ABC Arts Reference Panel. Please welcome Kim. Secondly, we have Sarah Hubolt, who works with the University of Technology Sydney in its Equity and Diversity Unit, coordinating central staff and student accessibility policy responses across the university. Her work champions the importance of cultural leadership and getting specific around how we look at accessibility in education, employment, design and innovation. Previously, Sarah worked for Accessible Arts to organise the 2016 National Arts Activated Conference at Carriageworks. Sarah is a Sydney 2000 Paralympian. What was the two finals you reached?
100 breaststroke and 100 butterfly.
Well done.
Yeah.
And turned circus performer, having worked with companies such as Cirque du Soleil. After learning her craft through community workshops and then working professionally as a performer for a number of years, Sarah turned her attention to disability arts history in the form of freak shows. In 2016, Sarah spoke at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas on the importance of honouring the history of artists with disability. In 2017, Sarah was engaged with the Sydney Festival program through the Scent of Sydney project, which I saw, it was wonderful, and the Circus and Access talk. Despite working for UTS this year, Sarah still maintains her arts practice. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
And last but certainly by no means least, Lena Naulus is the Executive Director of Diversity Arts Australia and was formerly Executive Director of Information and Cultural Exchange, or ICE, in Western Sydney. She has had 20 years experience in arts, cultural and media organisations, managing screen and digital media-based initiatives that have engaged thousands of people, particularly women, refugees, migrants and young people. Under Lena's leadership, ICE grew tenfold financially and in terms of projects and scope. She established the Switch Digital Arts Centre and co-founded the Arab Film Festival, including managing the first 3 festivals. Other roles include TAFE teacher, consultant for Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, Culture Beats Project, social history and exhibitions curator at Fairfield City Museum. Please welcome Lena. So for me personally, it's very humbling to share the stage with these amazing 3 ladies tonight. So thank you very much for your time and thank you all very much for coming. Look, we've got quite an interesting topic to discuss tonight, and I think before we get underway, I'd just like each of you maybe to sort of talk about, I guess, your own personal response to what the topic or theme is, and then 1 or 2 key learnings or ideas you'd like everyone to take away from tonight's conversation. Kim, would you like to go first?
Okay. So what would I like people to take away this evening? I think that it is that disadvantage is not a spectator sport. You know, and it's also not currency for people to use in order to be able to pat themselves on the back and say that they're doing a really good job. I arrived here tonight and I felt really angry today, which is not normally how I feel. But and I wasn't necessarily thinking about this topic, but you know, it's really, really, really hard to sustain the work that we do in community. If we talk up the disadvantage to people who give funding, it's easy to get money. But that's not actually how the people we work with want to be talked about. So I guess I'm feeling angry because I'm sort of in this conundrum now of how do we sustain the work that we do with people in community and the people that we serve in community without focusing on disadvantage. Because our work comes from an advantaged point of view, that we work with the things that people can do rather than the problems that they come with. But that just doesn't seem to be attractive. So I think it's definitely that it's not a spectator sport, and I've got lots of stories where I've, you know, witnessed spectators. But really I think this whole issue is a bit like an iceberg. You know, the little bit that we see on the top is no indication of the complexity that sits underneath, and I think that we should all walk away with the intention that we need to push back. Yeah.
Thanks, Kim. Lena?
I think that and I know we always get told this, but that it's, the importance of kind of really listening is something that, I see not happening a lot when, people are working with communities, not really listening, and also the importance of self-determination and autonomy of those communities. So there's also, I don't know if you have this experience, but like a lack of trust. So we're going to, and that I find frustrating sometimes when I see projects that are being worked on with communities who do have less power or less access, but people from those communities are not being trusted to be in positions of decision making and power, and are not being given those roles like an associate producer role, or actually kind of getting funded or paid to kind of play those supportive roles. So they're not being taken, on a journey that might, result in their own professional development. That there's a lot that we can learn from. I shouldn't say we, because that just sounds too motherhood. There's a lot that everyone can learn. Like I guess in my practice, I've always tried to not be a missionary. And I think that's really important, and it's kind of almost driven a lot of that practice, but there's a lot that we have to be really honest as practitioners or people who are running these projects to say that we're actually learning so much from this process and from these communities, and it's enriching us, and let's be honest about that.
For me, harnessing the arts to empower the disadvantaged is such a clunky phrase in itself. So I said yes straight away just to be able to argue it, I was like, yeah, I'm coming. Game on. So as an artist, when I wear my artist hat, I came from being a community participant. I came from having to do weekly workshops for many years in order to get the smallest amount of skills, and to have this carrot dangled in front of me to kind of go, yeah, here's a little bit more skill. Actually, no, we can't actually get all of your access requirements right because we're just community, and then when I went into emerging artists and mid-career artists and knocked on the doors of the professional opportunities, and they were like, oh yeah, but we can't do all of your access requirement, go back to the community. So one of my messages is actually everyone needs to look at access requirements, whether you're looking at a community program or a professional program. So that's my artist kind of message. And so it's not really about empowerment or disadvantage, it's actually about access requirements as an artist. And then with my arts manager kind of hat on and my tertiary institution hat on, harnessing the arts to empower disadvantage, actually let's just look at our structures and look at whether they are accessible, because that's everyone's responsibility, and especially the ones leading the projects.
Thank you. Well, that's a good segue, I guess, into the next part of what we wanted to talk about. I mean, I think everyone up here, and dare I say, a lot of people out there have used the word disadvantage within grant applications to seek support, seek funding and whatnot, but it is not a label that sits comfortably with any of us here on the panel tonight. And I think it was important to have a bit of a discussion or a conversation about the context of disadvantage before we move on to talking about something which all of us are very passionate about, and that's excellence and great art. I guess as a label, disadvantage applies that there is a dynamic, an exchange or a relationship where someone has privilege or advantage. And much of our practice comes from a place where identity and inclusion and self-expression are core. And as one person, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find someone that just identifies with one label. Life in general is so intersectional. And in most cases, disadvantage is a label that's applied to a person or a community by another. It's like an ABS demographic. It's a deficit approach where it's not strength-based. It sort of sees the negative rather than it's the positive. And I guess, Sarah, you've touched a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of each label in your previous response, but did you want to further talk about any of that at all?
Sure.
Yeah.
I found it so hard to, as an emerging artist and as a community participant, I had to leave the country to leave that term behind. I had to go to New Zealand for 6 years to kind of go, right? I don't want to be this participant thing. I actually want to be an artist. So to keep doing community workshops and to be in these programs that were supposedly meant to empower me, even though my access requirements weren't met, it wasn't empowering. It wasn't. I actually had to go and seek those independent collaborations and really leave the place where I was in order to break that mold of participant and to change that label into artist. And then as an artist, I still have to kind of go, well, the advantages of that is that I'm seen as an artist like everybody else, but the disadvantage of that is what if I am dependent and what if I do need something extra? Say like audio description within a creative development phase. Who does that in their community workshops? Who does that in their professional workshops? So how do we make sure that those things, regardless of what label we're choosing to use, that they're actually met?
Thank you, Sarah. Lena, I think it was you that today, when we were having a conversation, sort of mentioned that whole thing about you're never just one identity. Is there anything further that you want to sort of elaborate on that around?
I guess, with Diversity Arts Australia, we're really focused on kind of cultural diversity at the moment, but we're really aware of the always kind of intersectional nature of all diversity. You're never just, you're never just one identity. It's always, intersecting with other identities, whether it's, sexuality or disability or gender. And so, I think that that awareness is kind of really important, and it's always kind of shifting. And the kind of power that you have in certain situations can also constantly be shifting. So I don't know if that's really answering.
No, it's good. I mean, for me, I get sick of always being labelled by others as a person with a disability. People do that on my behalf, which, pardon my French, shoots me to tears.
And I think that's what I was saying too.
Exactly,
like back in this kind of sector where it is really yes, there are for us, we're really starting from starting from a place where we're seeing, participation in the arts as a fundamental human right. Where Australia's signatory to the United Nations Convention on
It's the 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Diversity of Expression.
I knew you'd remember that, and we signed it in 2009. So on the right to of cultural expression. So it is a real kind of fundamental human right, and there are issues with communities who are excluded from being able to participate or express themselves. But then also what I find, kind of problematic is the kind of identity politics, that idea of, this is my very, whatever, and it doesn't allow for connections and solidarity and working together when you're kind of occupying that position. And I think in all of our work we do take into account the complexities and of those multiple identities.
Well, Kim, I was going to say, I know that the conversation that we had focused a lot about, the arts enabling spaces where no one assumes power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so we talk about working in the what we call the third space, so that when an artist, a professional artist, for instance, comes into community and works one-on-one with an emerging artist or an artist in community, we sort of see a chemical reaction happen in that place. The starting point for that space is that no one assumes power over anybody else. So even though you might have a professional artist coming in and working with an emerging artist, we're both starting at the same place, and it's a place of creativity. So there's no imbalance of power in that space. And when you use the arts to create a new language that happens between those two people, it's kind of like where the ocean meets the land. Something special happens, is enabled actually in that environment. And when people know that they can do more, then they can actually be more once they step outside of that kind of really special space. And it's a space where the people that come to those workshops aren't labelled as being Aboriginal, disadvantaged, not behaving in the proper way. They come with a whole range of, poverty, all of those things. And in that kind of third space, all of those things can fall away and people can actually have the opportunity to be their true self. And that becomes a really transformational experience, and particularly for those who can observe that experience. They're hard places to sustain in community, however, because a lot of the young people that we work with in community are forever being forbidden to participate because they're not behaving in a particular way. So you're constantly fighting for access in the system to allow people to be involved.
Yeah, that happens in the disability sector as well. You get constantly blamed. If you ask for an access requirement, if you ask for what you need in order to level those playing fields, to take away that powerful and powerless, then you get blamed for asking for what you need and you get punished for it, and it's horrible. I've seen that time and time again in the arts, actually.
I was having a discussion with an artist who was very, very upset, had worked with a major cultural institution, kind of similar to what you're saying, and she felt that what they wanted, she was an artist from a non-English speaking background, and they wanted her to occupy a particular kind of what their idea of her cultural identity should be in that project. And when she talked to them about cultural appropriation, they had to put her in mediation, and none of those people managing that project were people of colour. I know that can also be a problematic term, but and she was so, and there was that exactly what Sarah was saying. If she makes a big fuss, she knows she's not going to get work. She's going to be seen as a troublemaker. And in the arts sector, particularly in mainstream arts sector, it's got a great power to lock people out from participating.
That's a real deficit, isn't it?
It is, and I guess my experiences have been on the flip side of that, where people have been wanting to make a fuss, where I've just been sort of saying, I'm cool. I had, even from beginning at school, where my high school that I went to back in WA made my parents enrol me at a special needs school that was next door to my high school, so that I could apparently receive the support needs that I needed to get through. And came out in year 12 that, we didn't think you'd make it, Jeremy, and things like that. So that really, and then I did lighting design at Whopper. And so as part of my audition process to get into that course, I had to prove that I could climb a ladder.
I've had that in the arts. I've had that in several arts projects where they've gone at the end of it, I didn't think you could do that. And I'm like, I'm not working with you again since you've said that. Yeah.
It's pretty, hectic. And I guess I just also wanted to reflect on the fact that with the context or genres of disadvantage is that it can be long-term or it can be one-off, like there's sort of situations around climate disaster, as we would have seen recently with the floods up north, and poverty, employment, health, displacement, crime and justice. And I guess there are very specific nuances around that sort of short-term, short burst versus the long-term approach that you, Kim, were talking about. Does anyone have any reflections more so on that at all? Or?
I think often in the short bursts or the short-term work that we often run the risk of doing more harm than good. And unfortunately we're caught in that cycle because that's how funding is given out. In short-term bursts, even though 3 years is considered to be a long time. 3 years isn't a long time in community. 3 years working in a community like Moree can take you 3 years to get a kid to turn up, and then suddenly the funding's gone. And it makes it hard for us as organisations working in community because we can't let community know that. We have to work out a way to sustain the work so that we're not doing harm to community, because it takes 10 years at least to try and, break us or change a cycle in a community like that. And it takes 10 years for the people that we work with in a place like Moree to know that they're actually, change is possible and that they have a voice in that community and can be in control of their own decision making. So again, it goes back to that thing I said at the start. I think it's time to start pushing back, and I think sometimes that's going to mean saying no to funding.
Yep.
Imagine, I always imagine if we, are there philanthropists in the room? Imagine if we just started saying no to money, so they couldn't give their money away until they actually started to do it sort of more on the terms of how community actually needed the work to be done. Because I don't think any academic learning can actually give someone the insight of what it's really like to work in a place like Moree or any of the other communities, because you sure as shit can't learn it in a book. And so I think, you know, like everybody, we don't know where the next bit of funding is coming from, and obviously we have to keep going, but I think we have to be strong and start to say no to those kind of terms that are being determined for us in the way that we're allowed to, or the way that we, you know, have to apply for funding.
And I'm kind of hoping we're in a sea change sort of time at the moment where in our funding applications, and when we do request money, we can actually use really authentic and language and integrity, and actually talk about that third space, Kim, that you were talking about before. Jeremy, I'm reminded with your comments on kind of people with disability are actually often teaching. And so when we're talking about yeah, right. When we're talking about when the powerless and the powerful change over, and if it's temporary or if it's, you know, is it transactional? Is it actually, you know what? People with disability are constantly volunteering their time every single minute of every single day to teach everybody else. That's not disempowered. That's leading. So let's recognise that for what it is and actually write that in our funding applications and make sure that the accessibility that is meant to, you know, and the relationship between accessibility and innovation, because when you're accessible, you're innovative, but you're not necessarily, when you're innovative, you're not necessarily accessible. So it actually comes from the community that you're trying to serve.
I know for a fact that you, that you can write a funding application and turn the volume up on the language around disadvantage, and you've got a way more stronger chance of being successful when you turn the language down. And we've purposely turned the language down. Got two of our team here tonight, and they're constantly turning the language down, and we're less successful now in getting funding than we've ever been, although our work is better than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lena.
Oh, well, just to respond to your question earlier, which was that, yeah, so there's a really interesting, if you look on our Facebook page, there's a few videos there that we've made with artists from a refugee background. And there's really different perspectives from these artists about whether you're a refugee forever or whether it's a short-term thing, you know, and you know, we're not going to resolve it, and it's not our job to resolve it. So when you talk about short-term and long-term projects, I've thought of a project that we worked on many years ago at ICE, which was with Sierra Leonean war journalists living in exile. And at that time, Australia had the highest number of Sierra Leonean journalists, you know, per capita out of any Western country we had brought in. And so we were working with a group of people who'd come to Australia as refugees, who'd suffered, you know, extreme persecution, who'd smuggled in all of this footage, which was amazing footage of the Civil War that hadn't been, you know, kind of shown anywhere before. And most of the people we were working with were working in kind of nursing homes as kind of cleaners and carers. And they were so interested in or passionate about, we need to get this footage seen. And so we worked with them over a period of time and kind of taught them skills in digitising, because we had all these VHS tapes that we'd, you know, sticky tape together and created a documentary. And some of those people went on to kind of then be, you know, employed in the media industry, and they'd all come from that background. One of them, Edison Yongai, was actually a published writer in Sierra Leone and had all of his house burned and all of his books burned, and we supported him to, you know, he wrote his first, you know, Australian-based kind of fiction novel, and we supported the launch of that. So, yeah, there are people who are going through particular crises as well, who might need support at a particular time, but yeah, as well as that kind of more ongoing and long-term support, and not to hog it, but like I know we did this a lot when we worked on projects in big public housing estates, like in Minto. We really, we didn't try. We worked in partnership with lots of organisations there because we knew that we couldn't give the communities that sustainability that we needed. Yeah. So it was about developing those partnerships and relationships.
And also partnerships that are of the same community that you're working with. So one of the things that, because I've also done community arts coordination at Auckland Council when I lived in New Zealand, and I was really conscious of, if I'm working with the Pacifica community or the Māori community, I'm not even a New Zealander. So always have someone of the community that you work with. That's a basic, maybe I don't have to reiterate that, that's probably something everyone knows. But if you've got a short-term project and you don't have a cultural leader or a partner with the appropriate cultural background, and I state that like it's, yes, we all know it, but we're not doing it in the disability sector. So let's do it in every sector that we're talking about.
And it's not happening enough in...
Is it not?
No. And I keep getting told it's because we can't find anybody.
Oh, that's
and it's
not
like,
true.
well, yeah, that's not true. And train someone. If that's true, then train them. Yeah, I keep getting told that.
Wow.
I think that's a really great segue because I wanted to sort of, something John Oster said that stuck with me since the Artland Summit in Dubbo last year was that relevance will bring excellence. And I think that's a really beautiful way of sort of moving on to the next part of our conversation is talking about art and excellence in this context. Lena, you've already touched on it with some of your responses. And I guess, it's that whole notion of whether or not associating disadvantage with an arts project, and does that impact people's perception on the quality of the art or what is possible, or indeed the quality of the artist that's actually delivering those projects. I guess what are people's perceptions? I mean, are you aware of people that would be out there that would sort of say, oh, it's a community-based project, so ooh, must be pretty good. Oh, look. Don't be shy, come on. I guess that's the thing, I mean, like, and then there's this whole tension and push and pull around process versus outcome.
Yeah, so we, whenever I think about what excellence is, my first thing is, well, who sets the bar anyway? Because my bar's different to your bar, and what I like is different to what you like. And then I also think that that in terms of excellence, whatever that is for whichever company is working, we have to make sure that it's a really high bar in community, because who says disadvantaged people like shitty art? That we've got to deliver something that's kind of second rate. No, it's not like that at all. The people that we work with or who we serve in our project have an incredible aesthetic, and it's our job to keep raising the bar on that. But I often think about our work being like a bit like an unwieldy sort of puppet, and sometimes your focus is on the process and the process of working with those people and the issues, the people that we work with and the issues that they're exploring, and sometimes the focus is on the artistic practice. And it sort of goes like this the whole time through a project. And then when you get the tension right between those two things, and the community is masterful at this, as is the artists that we work with, the moment that you get that tension right, you pull that tension right, that's when excellence kind of pops up out of the centre, and you see it moving our community and beyond the community of people that made the work. In our definition of excellence, that's what it is. It's when that beautiful thing pops out of the efforts of all of those people combined, who are combined. Yeah.
So beautifully put.
Yeah.
So beautiful. I love that.
And I guess in that same context too, what's something I've always been really keen on through my practice back in WA with data and whatnot with remote communities has been that context for audiences as well. And when they see great art and great process, and then the ripple effects that can create.
And it's a thing that moves you. It's the thing that you feel first. You feel it, and then you see it. We actually call it the, I won't swear, but we call it the F-wow factor. You know, when you're in community and you've got 700 people in a town hall and something happens and everyone goes, oh, wow, that was amazing. And everybody feels the love in the room, it's palpable. And they turn to each other and go, we should do this more often, this feels really good. You know, and the services that hate each other go, wow, this is really good, we should do this more often. That's excellent.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's when it works for community.
It sounds authentic.
Well, that's the reason we're there.
They're there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. And I guess in the context of making great art, I mean, there's always new genres, new forms of practice emerging, and, you know, I think the role of, I guess, you know, it's become a bit of a dirty word, but innovation through, you know, be it digital storytelling or new forms of socially engaged practice, you know, be that participatory art or an artist just working immersing themselves in community. And I guess around that notion that Lena had touched on about diversity and intersectionality around age and location and background and whatnot, that can sort of spark so many amazing opportunities within community through art and everything like that. I guess, does anyone have any commentary more about that?
I feel like, you know, and I know everyone will agree with me in the entire world, right now, you know, innovation is sometimes used in a really reductive way to mean new. So I know this artist who is a dancer who came to Australia on an exceptional talent visa from India. I know I've told this story before. I'm going to keep telling it until the funding guidelines change. And she's an exceptional dancer, but her dancing isn't considered contemporary or innovative enough to actually get grants. And so, you know, it's kind of really, really interesting. And she's running these amazing community-based projects in Liverpool, but she should also be able to practice as an artist and be supported for that. So I have a really fraught relationship with the term innovation and who determines
and again,
what
it
is
comes down to
innovation.
that context of the innovation as well. That's what something that my fellow peers when I was on the CP committee used to get bored again shitless of me sort of harping on about the context of that innovation. And you can't just sort of pull out the word innovation and say this is not innovative. But where is this in the spectrum of this particular artist or this community's ideas around what's new and what's, you know, where their practice is at and everything like that. And I think that's something that's so important that all funding bodies and philanthropists and whatnot should take into consideration.
We sort of think when we talk about innovation, we talk about unfamiliar and accessible. So it's exactly that, you know, what's unfamiliar to you might be familiar to somebody else, but it's the experience always of the individual and their interaction with the process is the starting point.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, we've got other people setting up the definitions for us, which makes it really, really difficult.
Yes, and we're also missing out, like, because what those artists can kind of bring to, say, dance practice or other practices will enrich, you know, the arts sector here and, you know, kind of broaden out audiences and also, you know, all levels of participation as well. Yeah.
Sarah, I mean, you're a practicing artist and a wonderful one at that. I mean, you know, and you've worked internationally and how do people respond to your work abroad?
Well, I think. Yeah, actually.
Yeah. Are they confronted or are they...
Oh yeah, but I like making confronting work. That's a tough question. I've worked on ensemble pieces, I've worked in collaborations, I've worked in partnerships because I do circus, so a lot of it is like with one other person, and I've worked on solo work. And so my latest show, Cuckoo the Bird Girl, which is a one-woman show about the freak shows, that was really divided, the audience, and some of that was about a story that's never been told before, so the newness of that, and some of it was about like, oh, she's blind, how did she do that, kind of stuff. So there's all those kind of, I call them now normal reactions because I'm like used to it. But innovative, like for me, I think my work is seen as innovative because I'm trying to break new ground in terms of like, how do you put the aesthetic of access into a performance in the creative development phase? How are you blind and do a contemporary dance piece? You know, all that kind of stuff. But also in my sector, in my community, I want to see someone with an intellectual disability directing a show. I want to see a little bit more authenticity around this relationship between the excellence of the art product and what an able-bodied notion of excellence is, and the authenticity and that sort of sense. So that's where I use innovation in a real positive way. The disability community is actually, it's going to be amazing when we turn the tables a little bit. Yeah, that's what I want to see.
Turn the volume and the tone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lena, what? I hope you're happy to recount what you told me on the phone earlier today, but I was going to sort of talk next about the blurring of lines. And I guess, you know, being where you're being a teacher and the notion of power and privilege in these situations, but spinning that slightly around the story that you told about the Ask Music program.
Oh, this is just a funny.
Yeah.
I love my
That's
funny.
yeah.
My funny stories keep me sane. We just so many funny stories. So one of them, I'll tell you that story. But you know, Muna Hatoum, who a lot of you will probably know, is a pretty well-known international contemporary artist. And we used to have this joke in the office at ICE that if she was born in Western Sydney, she'd be called a community artist. And so with this, when we started running urban music programs, we had some really good people running those programs who were kind of quite well known in the urban music scene as, you know, kind of, and we got complaint phone calls from people who wanted to do the program and saying, and I would say, you know, well, this is actually for people who, you know, young people who are unemployed, and they would say, well, they're not going to appreciate that program. Like, why you know, like they don't even know who those artists are. We know who those artists are. We want to do this program. So yeah, that was kind of cool. That just meant that we were, so the way that we were, you know, and I was really careful that how we articulated things kind of, which is going back to what Kim was saying, I guess, like the communities are really, really savvy consumers of all kinds of media and, you know, cultural production. Like they're so much savvier than you know, than we are, I reckon. And so if you have, you know, if you develop a crappy process or a crappy outcomes, they know it and they don't feel good about it. And so you've got to use really awesome artists, and you've got to articulate things in the language that respects them and gives respect to what they want, and design and develop programs. Because I don't know how many of you in the audience have sometimes found that kind of idea of a closed workshop thing of we can just produce really crappy stuff with this community, which is so greatly disrespectful to that community or that group. So.
Or having people enter community work who are just trying to fine-tune their own skills. Like I've often been in a learning situation where I actually need the most help in the room, but I'm paired up with the worst person in the room who doesn't know the skill, and I'm like, how am I going to learn from that? You know, and so it's people who always want to learn themselves by helping someone else, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but that doesn't have a good effect on me. You know, it's weird.
Yeah, I agree. So you need to get those, you know, those people who are really credible, who are practiced, in terms of the people who are doing the teaching and the training, people who are going to, you know, who the group, whoever it is you're working with, that they're going to kind of respect and want to work with and design projects with that in mind. That's what I feel anyway, yeah. Not people who don't have the skills yet and just want to get credits. And,
yeah. Well, know your reason for being, I guess. Yeah.
Before we move to sort of our closing remarks and whatnot, Kim, did you want to touch on? I really loved what you said during our conversation last week about the Brolga Festival and the stepping up notion of the children seeing.
Yeah, so we run a sort of a community festival in Moree every other year, and you know, and it sits around this idea that people need to be paid for their work. So it's this idea that if you're disadvantaged, you're going to volunteer because you know it's not currency. What you do doesn't have any currency. We actually defy that, and we pay everybody. And so during the festival, we had 157 people from community working on this community celebration, and for some of those people, there was 27 people from community who had never been paid before in their life for working. These are adults with children who had never been paid before for working. And what I found most fascinating about that wasn't that they stepped up and were great workers, because we knew they would do that, always ready on time, ready to do whatever was needed. But their children were so proud that their parents were working. And so I remember walking down the main street one day, and Leslie came running up to me, and it was like, Kim, where's Dad? He's working, where is he? He was just so excited that his father was working. And then the same day I drove another one of the team home, and her son little Andrew came running out of the house, and he too was really excited. Mum's been at work, you know, just really. And I realised that working is a human right. You know, it goes beyond this idea that we must get everybody working. Everybody we come in contact with in community wants to work, you know, and wants to be paid for their work. But more than that, for children to grow up in a healthy kind of vibrant environment, they deserve to know that their parents need to work, you know, and to be able to value that their parents are contributing something to community that they're also being recognised for in terms of is being paid is absolutely critical.
And that idea of contribution, it flips that deficit model to a strengths-based model, and everyone's contributing. I find the same in the disability community and disability arts community. You know, I've been in an integrated dance company where every person was paid for their contribution. Like, it was a company model, we were all dancers, you know, and that was in New Zealand. And then when I come to Australia and I find out that in the integrated dance model here, the people without disability are being paid to be in the room, but the people with disability have to pay to be in the room. And I'm like, I'm not paying. Thank you very much. Not until you know how to, you know, provide my access requirements. I got into a lot of trouble for that. But I'm like, no, that's wrong. You know, so who we're paying and why, I think, is really important.
I guess as we wrap up and head towards questions, I just wanted to sort of throw a general question out to the three of you about, obviously part of the sort of pretext for tonight's conversation was that the arts can be a tool for good. And we've talked about sort of already about how do we know when something's good, or how do we know when something's excellent. So what do we think about sort of outcomes, evaluation and measurement in this space, and the importance of that and the way we go about doing that, I guess. And I guess what is sometimes the risk, flipping the conversation, of damage? Yeah.
Oh, good one.
Oh.
Yeah, good one.
I mean, you have to, in order to get funding, you have to be able to prove that you're making a difference. We as a company are interested in working with people who sometimes nothing changes for. You know, that the opportunity to come into a space and have a great day, to have someone tell you that you're worth it and walk out and life continues on as it was before is enough. And it's very difficult to get funding for that. So we can count things, we can measure things. We're very good at that. We've tried very hard at that for 12 years. But the most important work is the opportunity for people to feel like they're valued and worthwhile, and sometimes that's unmeasurable, but it's still worth it.
It's still worth it, absolutely. Yeah.
That's cool. That's super cool. I feel like in the disability community, it's a slightly different space, in that I want more evaluations and I want more accountability, because a number of projects I've been involved in, whether it's in various different roles, there's not enough disability awareness training. And so sometimes the artists with disability in the room are really, really unsafe as a result of the lack of transparency. So I'm very keen for evaluation and accountability to keep people safe. So I'm a little bit on the other side of that conversation for various reasons. Yeah.
And I guess, you know, for us, well, for me, and, you know, in my experience of culturally diverse communities, especially working, with refugee communities, but also kind of people from migrant backgrounds or long-term unemployed people, it's better. Sometimes it's better not to do a project than to do a project badly without the right support.
Exactly.
Who do you think you are, random person who I'm imagining, that you can go in and talk to a group of refugees and ask them to tell their story to you? Why should they tell their story to you? What support do you have for them to tell this story? Who have you partnered with who has this skill and expertise? Why are you getting off on this? I'm not looking at any one of you, I'm just looking up there. I'm just, you know, like that is actually kind of, are you re-traumatising them? Are you all, trauma psychiatrists or psychologists? Like, so, you know, so like, is it, why is this project happening? Who's decided that it's happening? Is it my great idea that I had, or is it something that's come from, you know, community that's being developed in partnership? Are all those other partnerships in place so that you're not re-traumatising community? And what sustainability plan do you have in place? So if you're not going to be able to be around beyond the funding period, then who have you made solid partnerships and relationships with so that they can be around?
That's always the thing, that you go into a project personally, what's your legacy?
Yeah.
And
I
make
think
it a good one.
The lovely Alex on our team who's here, when we were writing some of our massive reports on the weekend, also raised the question about asking who's not here. You know, and when we're so governed by what we have to prove in terms of our work, it, you know, by its very nature excludes the people that most need to be there. So, you know, for us going forward, one of the main questions we're going to keep asking is who's not here and who's been excluded. That means by the, you know, the parameters that we've set around things to prove that they're good value for money.
On that note, we might throw to the floor. Hopefully there's a few questions that people have been jotting down or tweeting or whatever that they would like to ask the panel. So how have we... Magdalena, yes.
Well, firstly, thank you. Thank you to the four of you, because I think what's been really important to listen to for all of you is the fact that you're aware of where you're coming from in whatever setting that you're engaging with. And I think that is the first step to, you know, be aware of who you want to work with and the influences that we all have. And I think the four of you are in a position of influence and positive power. And so I thank you for your serious generosity and the responsibility by which you're communicating what you're doing. I guess one thing is obviously that privilege carries weight. And, you know, for the four of you and the fantastic work that you do, there are a lot of people that don't have that position of privilege. So, and I know that you've touched on a lot about the fact, how do you shift it, how do you talk about ensure that people are speaking with their voice, how do you make sure that people are getting paid? I mean, I'm appalled, Sarah, that you weren't paid for being part of a dance project, you know.
You have no idea how prevalent that is in this village community.
Yeah, well...
It's outrageous.
Absolutely. And I guess, sorry, this is becoming more of a statement, but I guess the fact really that...
It's like karaoke.
I know, the whole idea of great art and the great experience and that popping up moment that you spoke about is like, if we're not supporting every aspect of creative development and creative engagement, then we're not going to get that. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at in terms of, sorry, for those that don't know me, I work for the International Federation of Arts Councils and Culture Agencies, so I'm all about cultural policy. So the question to the four of you would be, knowing that we need those situations of that, you know, that spark, that synapses to happen at both community level, professional level, and, you know, creative level, what do we need to be telling government? You know, what do they need to be listening? How do we need to change? And I know that, you know, funding needs to be different, but like, what are the key messages? Why are we getting it so wrong?
I think we're frightened of the risk factor because we're so governed by making sure that there's an outcome. I think the opportunity to trial and test and collaborate to know that nothing may come out of it is a really great thing. We can't get funding for that because you've got to prove something at the end. Unfortunately, our chair agrees with that, so she funds those opportunities to test and trial and have nothing come out of it at the end. And I think not have nothing come out of it, because of course there are amazing outcomes, if you like, for the people involved, but the fact that there may be nothing tangible that then continues on is okay. I think they're really generative spaces, but they're risky spaces, and so I think again there's got to be greater dialogue around the value of risk and how generative it actually is. I mean, you learn to ride a bike by falling off a bike, not by getting on and riding straight away.
It's funny, I mean, the two areas that I oversee within council are so many similarities but so many polar opposites. I mean, emerging and experimental arts practice, they love risk. They're not scared of failure and everything like that, but CACD are still, I think, a lot of people within that area of practice are coming around to that. But something with my work that I've always done, particularly working in regional and remote WA, is that whole notion of really encouraging a positive narrative, because so often the story out of regional Australia is one of, well, the deficit model about sort of, natural disaster or unemployment or whatever. So using arts and culture as a means to try and sort of spin that narrative and show that its worth is something that's far greater than what a lot of people take for granted, I think.
Just to rip off what you two are saying, risk definitely. Keeping my peers safe, people with disability, whether they're
Cultural
participating, cultural safety. So yes, risk. The way that I would define risk is to create a disability-led approach. And it might not be the most skilled person in the room, but at least it's authentic, and so that's the risk that I want to see.
Relevance and
And I know that Australia Council for the Arts is doing with the Arts and Artists with Disability Funding and the Sync Leadership Program and that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's really made a positive impact. So in terms of, that level of government, I think that's on track. But
still, and that sort of, there's artists like you that have made the transition out of those silo programs into our core grants program, which is sensational, and that's what we want more of.
And I know that I'm only one person, and I know that there's a whole bunch of other people still to make those transitions and on their journeys. So defining the risk in terms of a disability-led approach from my community. Actually that's...
And for me, I want to see all funding tied to diversity outcomes, and I want it to be a really rigorous kind of process. I want there to be such a process that they have to have really good reports on how, they achieve those outcomes, like what they do in, for the British Film Institute's Diversity Fund and what's happening in other places. And also for funding bodies to not fund projects if they're working with, disabled communities and there's no one from disabilities in a position of power, then why are they funding that? And why is it not happening still? And that's the same with people from, culturally diverse backgrounds in Australia. So I don't, so that's what I want to see. And I think that can happen at a policy level, and it needs to.
And I know for me, I wouldn't have gotten this far if I didn't have role models to look up to. So I know, because I know what my arts practice is, and I know who my influences have been and who has gone before me. And I know that they would have been supported with government funding, or they've had their own journeys to get there. But as long as I've got a role model to look up to, I know I can keep going. So I think that's really important to foster.
Definitely. I mean, I was fortunate enough to receive a Young People in the Arts Fellowship back in WA, and that was one of the most transformative experiences I've ever had, because I was a techie before that, just production managing festivals, doing stage management gigs and whatnot. That fellowship allowed me to travel to Canada, work with the Canadian Institute for Young Audiences, develop an outreach program for outer metropolitan communities in Vancouver, and that's how I started on the trajectory that I've been on since. So that was in 2000. So the importance of programs like that and people knowing about those resources that they can apply for to help set those opportunities up is what, you know. Yeah. Any others questions? Surely, look, there's lots of you out there. Yes, up the back there. We'll just wait for the microphone to come, I think.
Karaoke mic.
Yes.
I didn't need my 20 million notes after all. No, just...
So there's been a lot of talk about funding, but there's also a big push to become business as communities and as artists and in combination of whatever you have in that spectrum. So I would like to hear more about that sort of thing, because there is a push and a lot of people are in that position when they applying for funding is a nightmare and they don't want to do that. And the other options are far away or difficult, or a combination of, oh my God, how do I go from community-based zero money to becoming a business? And I think the push is there and people are scared about that change.
So you're talking about people being forced to become a lot more commercial and develop a business acumen to their work? Well, I guess entrepreneurialism comes in many forms and shapes, and for me personally, I realised that the well was drying up as a lighting designer and a technician, and my body just physically wouldn't have been able to cope with doing that for life. So I set up a whole chain of other opportunity to sort of start doing something that I felt passionate about, and seeking opportunities to do that. And some of it wasn't paid, and that was very controversial in the time, because I just sort of thought that I needed to develop the skills in that new area before I could start asking for money, because I felt a bit fraudulent until that stage. And that's what I mean. A lot of people said, and organisations that took me in as a volunteer got in trouble for doing that. So I think there's still a place for people that want to do skills development. It's by no means by best practice, but there is that need, I think.
I think for me, looking at, yes, we did talk a bit about funding, and to talk a bit about the business model. I've helped a few organisations with their disability action plans, their access and inclusion plans, and they talk a lot about what can we do for this community? What activities do we need to do? How do we engage with this audience? What specialised product do we need to offer? What funding do we need to get for that? And I'm like, when are you going to employ somebody, actually? Because if you can't get the funding, the next best thing you can do, and actually the first thing you need to do anyway, is actually to employ somebody. And so that is the business model.
We might wrap it up. I think it's probably time we all popped over to the other side of the room and had a drink.
It's a really silent.
That was the most fantastic discussion. I think everyone agrees that it really was remarkable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You four people.
Thank you, Jim, Lena and Sarah.
We've got to announce that our chair is moving to Melbourne. She's leaving us. It's very sad, Sophie Lieberman. So Morwena's just going to come up and say one or two words about Sophie. Then it's drink time, I promise.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks, panel. It's actually reflecting on Sophie's time on the SAMAG committee. Where is she? There she is. Sophie, stand up. So Sophie's been with SAMAG for a number of years, 5 years, thank you, Sophie. She's all over the stats, which has been a great thing that she's helped bring to SAMAG in the last year or two. But what a great seminar to finish on, Sophie, because I was thinking about your contribution to this organisation and this committee, and I think there are a number of things that SAMAG has really come a long way with during your time, and one I think is a much stronger commitment to diversity, and something that we absolutely have on our agenda as a committee to make sure we increase that level of diversity even further. And a couple of other things to throw in the mix would be the work that we've done in the digital space, upgrading the website, live streaming, but you've been a big part of that too as well. So, and I also think during your time, the strength of our committee has really grown as well. So you are going to leave an amazing legacy behind. So thank you. Acme and Melbourne's gain will be our loss. But we have a token of our appreciation that we would like to give you. And if you can please join me in thanking Sophie for her amazing job as chair.
I don't need a microphone, I've got a big loud voice. Thank you very much, Rowena and committee and audience for this slightly self-indulgent moment on behalf of the SAMAG committee. It's been an absolute highlight of my career being part of SAMAG. Indeed, part of the reason I'm able to go to ACME is because of the involvement and the learning that I've had with this committee, first as a member and now as chair. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to our committee members past and present, but most importantly to our audience and the extraordinary and diverse range of people who do come and speak for us, speak about issues that we think are important to the future of the sector, and to the audience who have continually told us also what they think is important and responded to that. So I leave very happy with the state of affairs, not a little bit sad to say goodbye, but I will be back.